I never expected a routine Tuesday at Pioneer Square in Portland to shatter my carefully reconstructed world. 8 years of methodically rebuilding my life after Sarah crumbled away in an instant. The familiar scent of vanilla and jasmine, her signature perfume, hit me first, stopping me mid-stride as I was heading to my usual coffee spot. My heart recognized it before my mind could process what was happening, like muscle memory refusing to fade despite years of forced forgetfulness. Then came the laughter, bright, crystalline, and multiplied. Two distinct streams of joy that made me turn instinctively toward their source. That's when I saw them, a pair of small figures with copper-colored hair darting between the legs of hurried commuters, their movements synchronized like mirror images. 7 years old if I had to guess. The same age as the void Sarah and I had tried desperately to fill with fertility treatments and shattered hopes. My coffee grew cold in my hand as I stood frozen, watching the twins weave through the crowd with the kind of calculated chaos only children can master. Their features were impossible to mistake. The same slight upturn of the nose that I see every morning in my bathroom mirror, the same cleft chin that 3 generations of Mitchell men have carried. My father's eyes staring back at me doubled. Sarah appeared behind them, her hands reaching out to corral their energy, and time seemed to fold in on itself. She looked exactly the same and completely different, still elegant in her tailored blazer, but with a softness around her edges that motherhood had painted onto her frame. The sight of her stopped my breath, not because of lingering attraction, but because of the mathematical impossibility playing out before me. The fertility specialist had been crystal clear. Sarah's condition meant natural conception wasn't possible. We had the painful conversations, signed the divorce papers, and went our separate ways, all because of that medical certainty. Yet here she was, with 2 living, breathing contradictions to everything I thought I knew about our past. The crumbling of my reality felt like watching a Jenga tower collapse in slow motion. Each assumption I'd built my post-Sarah life upon being pulled away one by one. The twins' age, their unmistakable features, the timing, it all added up to a truth that threatened to break something fundamental inside me. I should have walked away. Should have turned around, gone back to my office, and filed this moment away with all the other what-ifs and might-have-beens that haunt the corners of my mind. But as I stood there, watching the family I never knew I had, a deeper truth emerged. Some questions once asked cannot be unasked. Some doors once opened refused to be closed. My feet began moving of their own accord, carrying me toward the 3 of them like a piece of metal drawn to a magnet. Sarah saw me then, her eyes widening with recognition and something else, fear? Guilt? The calm mask she'd perfected during our marriage slipped for just a moment, revealing the turmoil beneath. That's when I knew this wasn't just a chance encounter in a city of hundreds of thousands. This was the beginning of unraveling a mystery that had been waiting 8 years to be solved. The last time I saw Sarah was in our lawyer's office, both of us signing away 5 years of marriage with trembling hands. The office had smelled of leather and furniture polish, and she'd worn that same perfume, a scent that had once meant home but now carried the sting of failure. We'd promised to remain friends like all divorcing couples do, but some wounds are too deep for friendship to survive. Now, standing in Pioneer Square, that day rushed back with devastating clarity. Memory is a treacherous thing. It shows you what you think you want to forget, while hiding the very details you desperately need to remember. Like the exact date of our last fertility treatment, was it really 8 years ago? The timeline in my head started shifting like sand in an hourglass, each grain a moment I needed to re-examine. The twins looked 7, maybe 8. Their birth would have been right after everything fell apart. One of the boys, the one in the red baseball cap, looked up at me with curious eyes. My father's eyes. I remembered Sarah once saying she hoped our children would have those eyes, back when hope was still something we allowed ourselves to feel. The other twin tugged at his brother's sleeve, whispering something that made them both giggle. Their laughter cut through me like shards of broken dreams, each sound a reminder of what I thought I'd lost. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between me and the children with the instinctive protectiveness of a mother. A mother. The word stuck in my throat like a bitter pill. We had spent 3 years trying to make her a mother, 3 years of hormone injections, scheduled intimacy, and crushing disappointments. I still remember holding her on our bathroom floor after each negative test, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere sadness. The specialist had been emphatic. Mrs. Mitchell's condition means natural conception is virtually impossible. We'd sat in his sterile office, surrounded by diplomas and medical journals, as he explained in clinical terms why we would never have children of our own. Sarah had gripped my hand so tight her nails left crescents in my palm. Those marks faded within hours, but the scars that diagnosis left on our marriage never healed. Yet here she stood, evidence of either a miracle or a lie embodied in two energetic boys who couldn't sit still. The mathematical probability of spontaneous conception with her condition was less than 1%. But looking at these boys, my chin, my nose, my father's eyes, probability seemed like a flimsy defense against reality. The crowd in Pioneer Square continued to flow around us like a river moving past stubborn rocks, oblivious to the earthquake happening in my world. A street musician somewhere was playing yesterday on a saxophone, the melancholy notes a perfect soundtrack to this moment of reckoning. 8 years of acceptance and moving forward were unraveling with each passing second. The life I'd rebuilt, the peace I'd found, it all felt like a house of cards in a sudden windstorm. Sarah's expression shifted from fear to resignation, as if she'd always known this day would come. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand slightly, a gesture we'd often used during our marriage when words needed to wait. There were too many questions crowding my mind, too many emotions threatening to spill over. This conversation couldn't happen here, not in the middle of a busy square with her sons watching. My throat felt like sandpaper as I gestured toward ground-up coffee, the shop I'd been heading to before my world tilted on its axis. Sarah nodded, understanding flickering across her face. She remembered how I always needed coffee to process difficult conversations. Some habits don't change even when everything else does. Boys, she said softly, this is an old friend of Mommy's. The words hit me like a physical blow. An old friend. Is that what I'd been reduced to? The twins looked at me with identical expressions of polite disinterest, the kind only children can perfect. They were more interested in the street performer's golden retriever than the stranger who shared their DNA. Michael and Matthew, she added, almost apologetically. The names landed like bombs in my consciousness. Michael, my father's name. Matthew, my middle name. Even in my absence, she'd branded them with my identity. The coincidence was too precise to be accidental, too cruel to be casual. Each revelation felt like another turn of a knife I hadn't known was there. We found a quiet corner in the coffee shop, the twins occupied with hot chocolate and the banana bread Sarah always loved. Some things hadn't changed. She still stirred her coffee 3 times counterclockwise, still tucked her hair behind her right ear when nervous. But now she wore a different wedding ring, and her eyes carried the weight of secrets I couldn't begin to understand. The silence between us grew thick with unspoken accusations. Through the window I could see Pioneer Square's iconic statue, the same one we used to meet at when we first started dating. Back then we were just two ambitious lawyers who thought love could conquer anything. Now we sat like strangers, separated by 8 years and 2 impossible children who were currently leaving chocolate fingerprints on the coffee shop's pristine tables. I watched Matthew, or was it Michael, carefully break his banana bread into equal pieces, sharing with his brother without being asked. The gesture reminded me so much of my own childhood habits that it felt like looking through a time portal. Sarah noticed too, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before darting away. She knew. She'd been watching my mannerisms emerge in our sons for 7 years while I lived in ignorance. The weight of lost time pressed down on me like a physical force. 7 years of first steps, first words, first everything, gone. Birthdays, Christmases, skinned knees, and bedtime stories. All these moments had happened without me, while I was just 20 minutes away in my downtown apartment, drowning my sorrows in work and believing I would never be a father. The questions burned in my throat, threatening to explode into the careful peace of the coffee shop. But looking at the twins, my sons, happily dunking their banana bread in hot chocolate, blissfully unaware of the emotional storm brewing around them, I knew this wasn't the time or place. Some conversations need privacy for the wounds they'll reopen. Sarah seemed to read my thoughts, another habit that hadn't faded with time. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling slightly as she typed something and slid it across the table. Her new address. The gesture held a weight of invitation and apology, of explanation and reckoning. Tomorrow, it seemed to say. Tomorrow we'll unravel this web of secrets and lies. I nodded, pocketing my phone with her message unread. Some truths need to be faced head-on, not previewed through a screen. As I stood to leave, Michael, or Matthew, looked up at me with those familiar eyes and smiled, a simple gesture that shattered what remained of my composure. Bye, Mommy's friend, they chorused, the word friend echoing in my head like a mockery. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The walk back to my office felt like wading through quicksand. Each step required conscious effort, my body moving on autopilot while my mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. I couldn't go back to work, not with this tornado of thoughts threatening to tear apart my carefully constructed composure. Instead, I found myself in Washington Park, sitting on the same bench where I drafted my wedding vows a lifetime ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. 8 years ago, I'd sat in this very spot composing promises of forever, having no idea how temporary forever could be. Now I was here again, watching joggers and dog walkers pass by, all while my understanding of the past 8 years crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. The twins' faces kept flashing in my mind, a perfect blend of Sarah and me, as if someone had taken our wedding photos and run them through one of those apps that show you what your future children might look like. Except these weren't digital predictions. They were flesh and blood, walking, talking proof that everything I thought I knew was wrong. I pulled out my phone, reading Sarah's address again, 2847 Northwest Thurman Street. Just a few miles from where I lived all this time. How many times had I unknowingly passed my own children in the grocery store? Had they ever played in the same park where I take my Sunday morning runs? The familiar ache of our fertility struggles surfaced with renewed intensity. I remembered the day Sarah started the hormone treatments, how she'd put on a brave face while her hands shook as she prepared the first injection. The way she'd cry silently in the shower after each failed attempt, thinking I couldn't hear her through the bathroom door. The growing distance between us as each negative test added another brick to the wall of our shared disappointment. But now, a new memory emerged, one I'd buried deep beneath layers of grief and acceptance. That last month before everything fell apart, Sarah had been different. More distant, yes, but also calmer? As if she'd found some peace I couldn't understand. I'd attributed it to acceptance, to her finally coming to terms with our childless future. What a fool I'd been. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, reminding me about a client meeting. The real world was still turning, oblivious to my personal earthquake. I opened my calendar app to reschedule and something caught my eye, the date. Tomorrow would have been our wedding anniversary. 13 years since we stood in front of our friends and family, promising to honor and cherish each other. Did she choose this day for our confrontation on purpose? The Sarah I knew loved symbolic gestures, hidden meanings. A group of children ran past my bench, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. 2 boys among them were playing some sort of elaborate game involving jumping over cracks in the sidewalk. My throat tightened as I imagined Michael and Matthew doing the same thing, their synchronized movements guided by the invisible thread that seems to connect twins. Had they inherited my childhood fear of stepping on lines? Did they sleep with a nightlight like I did until I was 10? All these small details of their lives were complete mysteries to me, blank pages in a book I should have helped write. The sun was setting now, painting Portland's skyline in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow I would walk into Sarah's house and demand answers. Tomorrow I would learn why she kept my sons from me for 7 years. Tomorrow I would finally understand what combination of choices and circumstances led us here. But tonight I needed to sit with this new reality, to let it settle into my bones like the evening chill. Because once I stepped through Sarah's door, nothing would ever be the same again. Sleep refused to come that night, leaving me alone with memories I thought I'd locked away years ago. The last night of our marriage kept playing in my mind like a movie I couldn't turn off. It was raining, Portland's typical November drizzle that makes everything look like an impressionist painting. Sarah had been quiet during dinner, pushing her food around the plate in that way she did when something was weighing on her mind. I remember thinking she was about to suggest another round of fertility treatments. We'd agreed to stop, to accept our reality, but I'd seen her researching new clinics when she thought I wasn't looking. Instead, she'd looked up at me with eyes that seemed decades older than her 32 years and said, "I think we need to let each other go." The words had hit me like a physical blow, even though part of me had been expecting them. We'd become experts at avoiding each other in our own home, dancing around the elephant in the room with practiced grace. The nursery we'd painted yellow remained empty, door always closed, a monument to our failure. She'd stopped wearing her wedding ring to bed, claiming it caught on the sheets. I'd started staying later at the office, buried in case files that couldn't break my heart. Now, lying in my bed 8 years later, I wondered about the timing. Had she already known she was pregnant that night? Had she been protecting the twins or punishing me? The Sarah I knew, or thought I knew, wasn't capable of such calculated cruelty. But then again, the Sarah I knew couldn't have children. I got up and went to my home office, pulling out our old wedding album from the bottom drawer. I never could bring myself to throw it away, despite my therapist's suggestions about letting go of physical anchors to the past. The Sarah in these photos was radiant, her smile untouched by the pain that would come later. There was one picture in particular, Us feeding each other cake, her nose wrinkled with laughter as I got frosting on her chin. We'd been so young, so certain that love could overcome any obstacle. Running my fingers over the photo, I remembered something she'd said during one of our last fertility appointments. The doctor had been explaining, again, why natural conception wasn't possible, and Sarah had muttered under her breath, "Nothing is impossible with faith." I dismissed it as desperate hope at the time, but now the words took on a different meaning. Had she already found her miracle then? Had she been trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear? My phone lit up with a text from my current girlfriend, Rachel, asking if we were still on for dinner tomorrow. The guilt hit me immediately. I'd completely forgotten about our plans. How could I explain this situation to her? Sorry, have to cancel. Just found out my ex-wife had my twins 7 years ago and hid them from me. There's no protocol for this kind of revelation, no WikiHow article on how to handle discovering you've been a father for 7 years without knowing it. I texted back a vague excuse about a work emergency, another lie to add to the growing pile of deceptions surrounding this situation. Rachel and I had been dating for 6 months and things were getting serious. Just last week, she'd been hinting about wanting to meet my family, talking about her biological clock and how she'd always wanted children. The irony was almost too much to bear. Outside my apartment window, Portland's nightlife was in full swing, bass beats from the club down the street providing a rhythm to my chaotic thoughts. Tomorrow, I would walk into Sarah's house not just as her ex-husband, but as a father demanding answers. Tomorrow, I would look into the eyes of 2 boys who shared my blood but not my memories. Tomorrow, I would finally learn the truth, or at least Sarah's version of it. But tonight, surrounded by old photographs and older regrets, I wondered if some truths are better left buried in the past. Morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear sky that Portland rarely sees in autumn, as if the weather itself was conspiring to make this day more momentous. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, noticing for the first time how the twins' features were reflected in my own face. Had Sarah looked at our sons every day and seen me in their smiles, their gestures, the way they tilted their heads when curious? The thought made me grip the sink until my knuckles turned white. I called in sick to work, my first time in 3 years. Linda, my assistant, had been surprised enough to ask if I needed her to call a doctor. If only this kind of sickness could be cured with antibiotics and bed rest. My suit felt like armor as I put it on, the same one I'd worn to court countless times. Today's battle wouldn't take place in a courtroom, but I needed every bit of protection I could get. The drive to Northwest Thurman Street was surreal. Every stoplight seemed to hold me back, every green light pushed me forward towards a confrontation I both craved and dreaded. I passed the school bus and found myself wondering if that's how Michael and Matthew got to school. Did they take the bus together? Did Sarah drive them? Was there another man in their lives who handled morning drop-offs and afternoon pickups? Sarah's house was exactly what I would have expected, a restored Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden that looked like it came straight out of Better Homes and Gardens. The kind of house we used to dream about when we were married, back when our future seemed as bright as that morning sky. 2 identical blue bikes were propped against the porch railing, training wheels still attached. The sight made my chest tighten. I sat in my car, engine idling, watching the house as if it might reveal its secrets if I stared long enough. A cat lounged on the porch, regarding me with typical feline indifference. Through the front window I could see movement, someone walking past, too tall to be the twins. Sarah? Or someone else? The question of whether she had remarried suddenly hit me with unexpected force. I'd never bothered to check, convinced that maintaining total ignorance of her life was the key to maintaining my sanity. My phone buzzed, Rachel again, asking if everything was okay. I turned the phone off without responding. How could I explain to her that I was sitting outside my ex-wife's house, preparing to confront her about the children she'd hidden from me? Children that would change not just my life, but potentially Rachel's too if she chose to stay with me after this. The ripple effects of Sarah's deception would touch everyone in my orbit. The twins' bikes seemed to mock me from their place on the porch. Blue had been my favorite color as a kid. Was that coincidence, or had Sarah remembered? How many other pieces of me had she woven into their lives while keeping me in the dark? The anger I'd been suppressing since yesterday began to bubble up again, mixing with a grief so profound it threatened to overwhelm me. It was nearly 9 o'clock. The twins would be at school by now. This was deliberate on Sarah's part, I realized. She'd chosen a time when we could talk without them present. Always the strategist, my ex-wife. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. But this time, I wasn't the naive husband who trusted her implicitly. This time I came armed with questions that demanded answers. I stepped out of my car into the crisp morning air, straightening my tie more out of habit than necessity. Each step up the porch felt like crossing a threshold into another dimension. One where I was a father, where the last 8 years of acceptance and healing were based on a foundation of lies. The cat watched me with unblinking eyes as I reached for the doorbell, its sound echoing through the house like a warning bell. There was no turning back now. Sarah opened the door wearing the same emerald green sweater from yesterday, as if no time had passed, as if this was just another morning in our old life together. The familiar scent of her coffee, always French roast with a hint of vanilla, wafted out, mixing with the autumn air. Some habits die hard, I thought, remembering how she used to say she couldn't face difficult conversations without caffeine in her system. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. Her hand trembled slightly as she gestured toward the living room. The interior of the house was a study in controlled chaos, evidence of children everywhere, but organized with Sarah's characteristic precision. Twin backpacks hung on identical hooks by the door, labeled Michael and Matthew in her neat handwriting. A wall of photos stretched up the staircase, documenting 7 years of moments I should have been part of. I forced myself to look away before the sight could break my composure. The living room was warm and inviting, sunlight streaming through large windows onto comfortable furniture that looked well-loved. A half-finished game of Monopoly Junior sat on the coffee table, two distinct piles of money and properties suggesting an ongoing battle between brothers. My eyes fixed on the properties. One pile was organized by color, just as I always did. Nature or nurture? The question felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Sarah settled into an armchair, wrapping her hands around a coffee mug like a shield. I remained standing, unable to find comfort in this space that should have been partly mine. A school art project hung on the wall behind her, two hand-drawn family portraits, clearly done by different hands but showing the same three figures: a tall woman with brown hair and two small boys. No father figure. The absence felt like an accusation. "They're at Plymouth Elementary," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Second grade. Mrs. Anderson's class." Each detail was like a key unlocking a door I hadn't known existed, revealing glimpses of a life that had been running parallel to mine for 7 years. "Michael is left-handed like you. Matthew has your allergy to strawberries. They both love basketball and they're already better at math than I ever was." The casual way she delivered these facts, these precious details about my own children, made my hands curl into fists. "Stop," I said, my voice hoarser than I'd expected. "Just stop. You don't get to do this, Sarah. You don't get to sit there and feed me crumbs about my own sons as if you're doing me a favor." She flinched at my tone, her fingers tightening around her mug. The morning light caught her wedding ring, a different one from yesterday, I noticed. Not just married then but newly so. Another detail she hadn't bothered to share. "I know you're angry," she began, but I cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Angry? Angry doesn't begin to cover it. You stole 7 years of fatherhood from me. 7 years of birthdays, first steps, first words. You watched our sons grow while I lived with the belief that I would never be a father. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it's still doing to me?" A framed photo on the side table caught my eye. The twins at what appeared to be their 6th birthday party, faces covered in chocolate cake. The same way Sarah had looked in our wedding photo, down to the frosting on her chin. The parallel was too much to bear. "How?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "How was this even possible?" "The doctors said." "I know what they said," Sarah interrupted, setting down her mug with deliberate care. I remember every word of every appointment. Every percentage, every probability, every sympathetic head shake. I also remember the day I discovered they were wrong. The day I had to decide whether to trust science or a miracle. The day I chose to protect my pregnancy the only way I knew how. The implication of her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of years of deception. Outside, a school bus rumbled past, carrying other people's children to their normal, uncomplicated lives. Inside, the ticking of an old grandfather clock marked the seconds as I waited for an explanation that could somehow make sense of everything that had been stolen from me. Sarah stood up, moving to the window as if she needed distance between us for what she was about to say. "Do you remember Dr. Harrison's last words to us? Medical science isn't infallible." He said it like a throwaway comment, something to soften the blow of another failed treatment. But 2 weeks later, I realized I was late. My mind raced back to those final weeks of our marriage. Sarah's withdrawal, the missed dinners, the long hours she claimed to be spending at the office. "I didn't believe it at first," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I took 12 pregnancy tests. All positive. But I couldn't bear to hope again. Not after everything. Not with you watching me so carefully, waiting for me to break down again. The grandfather clock continued its relentless ticking, marking time as my world shifted on its axis once more. When the first ultrasound showed twins, I was terrified. Not just of losing them, but of losing myself if I did. You were already pulling away, burying yourself in work, unable to look at me without seeing all our failures reflected back at you. So you decided to leave? The words came out sharper than I intended, slicing through the morning quiet. You chose to divorce me rather than tell me I was going to be a father? She turned back to face me, tears streaming down her face now. I chose to protect them. The doctors said the stress of our fertility struggles might have contributed to our previous failures. Every time we lost hope, it broke something in both of us. I couldn't risk it, not with 2 heartbeats finally, miraculously, growing inside me. My eyes were drawn to a school photo on the mantel. The twins in matching blue sweaters, their smiles revealing missing front teeth. But after they were born? When they were healthy and safe. You had 7 years, Sarah. 7 years to pick up the phone, to send a letter, to do anything other than keep my children from me. I know, she whispered, the words heavy with regret. At first, I told myself I was waiting for the right time. Then months became years and the right time never seemed to come. How do you tell someone you've kept their children's secret for so long? How do you justify that kind of betrayal? I sank onto the couch, the weight of her words physically overwhelming me. A toy car pressed into my thigh. I pulled it out, turning it over in my hands. It was the same model my father had given me when I was 8. The boys, I said, voice rough. Do they know anything about me? Sarah moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a thick photo album. They know their father was someone I loved very much, someone who would have adored them if he'd known about them. They know they have your eyes, your laugh. They know you're a lawyer who fights for people who need help, just like I do. She held out the album, her hands shaking slightly. I've documented everything. Every milestone, every achievement, every silly moment. I told myself it was in case you ever found out, but maybe it was really to ease my own guilt. Opening the album felt like opening a door to an alternate universe. One where I hadn't missed first steps, first words, first days of school. The photos blurred as tears filled my eyes. The twins in Halloween costumes on Santa's lap, playing in summer sprinklers. 7 years of memories I should have been part of, preserved in glossy 4x6 prints that felt both precious and painful. Daniel, Sarah said softly, using my name for the first time since I'd arrived. There's something else you need to know. Something that might help you understand why I made the choices I did. She reached for a folder on the highest bookshelf, its edges worn as if it had been handled many times. It's about what really happened at the fertility clinic 8 years ago. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder, pulling out what looked like medical records. The paper was creased from repeated folding and unfolding, its edges soft with age. 3 months before our last appointment, I discovered something about Dr. Harrison's clinic. Something that made me question everything we'd been told. My throat tightened as memories of that sterile office flooded back. The uncomfortable chairs, the sympathetic smiles from the receptionist, the way Sarah's hand would grow cold in mine as we waited for more bad news. What are you talking about? There was a lawsuit, she continued, her lawyer's precision taking over as she laid out the facts. It never made it to court because they settled quickly and quietly. A woman claimed the clinic had deliberately misdiagnosed her with infertility to profit from unnecessary treatments. When I found the case file, I started digging deeper. The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying they lied to us? That you were never actually infertile? Sarah spread several documents on the coffee table between us. I'm saying Dr. Harrison lost his medical license 6 months after we stopped seeing him. I'm saying 3 other women from his clinic got pregnant naturally after being told they never could. I'm saying when I realized I was pregnant with the twins, I also realized we might have spent 3 years being manipulated by someone who saw our desperation as a source of profit. I stared at the documents, my legal training automatically noting dates, names, case numbers. Everything checked out. My hands started shaking as I remembered how many thousands we'd spent on treatments, how many times we'd maxed out credit cards believing we were investing in our future family. Why didn't you tell me this? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. When you found out about the lawsuit, why keep it from me? Sarah's face crumpled slightly. Because by then I was already pregnant. And I was terrified, Daniel. Terrified that if I told you about the clinic, about the pregnancy, about any of it, the stress and anger would somehow make everything go wrong again. Even if our previous losses weren't my fault, I couldn't take that risk. Not with 2 babies. A child's drawing on the refrigerator caught my eye. stick figures of the twins holding hands with Sarah. The empty space beside them seemed to pulse with accusation. So you let me believe I'd failed you. Failed us. You watched me walk away thinking I couldn't give you what you wanted most. I let you believe what the doctors had told us, she whispered. Because the truth seemed more cruel somehow. That we'd been lied to, cheated, manipulated. That we'd let those lies tear us apart. That our marriage had crumbled over a fraud. The room felt too small suddenly, the weight of 7 years of misconceptions pressing in from all sides. Photos of my sons surrounded me, school pictures, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, each one a moment stolen by a lie that had spawned more lies. The toy car was still in my hand. I realized I'd been gripping it so tightly my knuckles had turned white. There's more, Sarah said quietly, pulling another document from the folder. Something I discovered just last month. Something about other families from the clinic. Something that made me realize we had to meet again, whether I was ready or not. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The new document Sarah placed before me was a newspaper article from last month's Portland Tribune. As I scanned the headline, my legal training kicked in, picking out key phrases that made my blood run cold. Fertility clinic investigation. Multiple sets of twins. Pattern of deception. My hands were numb as I read further. 5 other couples, Sarah said softly, watching my face as I absorbed the information. All patients of Dr. Harrison during the same period we were there. All diagnosed as infertile. All ended up with twins within a year of leaving the clinic. She paused, letting the statistical improbability sink in. And all the twins were born within months of Michael and Matthew. The implications hit me in waves. Are you saying? I'm saying Dr. Harrison wasn't just lying about infertility diagnosis, Sarah interrupted, her lawyer's voice taking over again. There's evidence suggesting he was actively manipulating test results, prescribing unnecessary treatments, and, she hesitated, potentially tampering with hormone therapies to increase the likelihood of multiple births. My mind raced back to those endless appointments, the careful monitoring of Sarah's hormone levels, the precise timing of treatments. We trusted him completely, desperate parents to be clinging to every word of hope he offered. The other families, I managed to ask, do they know? Sarah shook her head. The investigation is still ongoing. But when I saw the article, when I realized what might have happened, I knew I couldn't keep this from you anymore. Not just about the twins but about everything. You deserve to know what really destroyed our marriage. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to think. The wall of family photos caught my attention again. 7 years of birthdays, holidays, first days of school. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. In several of the pictures there were other sets of twins in the background. At birthday parties, school events, playground outings. The other families, I said slowly, turning back to Sarah. You found them, didn't you? You've been in contact with them all along. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. We met at a twins playgroup when the boys were 6 months old. It didn't take long to realize we had all been Dr. Harrison's patients. We've supported each other over the years, shared resources, helped each other understand what happened to us. The other mothers, they've been my lifeline. And the other fathers? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Some know, some don't. Every family had to make their own choices about how to handle the truth. She reached for a photo album I hadn't noticed before, smaller than the others. But now that the investigation is public, now that the truth about the clinic is coming out, everything is changing. The other families are starting to talk about legal action. The lawyer in me immediately understood the implications: class action lawsuit, medical malpractice, fraud, emotional distress. But the father in me, the man who had just discovered his children, could only think about the human cost. How many other families had been torn apart by Harrison's lies? How many other fathers were out there, unaware they had children growing up without them? Sarah's voice broke into my thoughts. There's a meeting next week. All the families from the clinic. Most of them will be there, including... She hesitated, including the ones who don't know everything yet. I think you should come. Not just as a lawyer but as a father. The twins will be there. All the twins will be there. And maybe it's time for everyone to know the whole truth. The grandfather clock struck 10, its chimes echoing through the suddenly quiet house. Through the window, I could see the twins' bikes still leaning against the porch, their blue paint bright in the morning sun. Somewhere across Portland, other pairs of twins were probably riding identical bikes, all of them connected by a web of lies that was finally starting to unravel. Sarah disappeared into the kitchen, returning with fresh coffee, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. As she poured, her hand shook slightly, causing drops to spill on the manila folder containing the clinic documents. The dark spots spread like tiny accusations across the paper. "Tell me about them," I said suddenly, surprising both of us. "The other families. The other twins." I needed to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with, needed to know how our story fit into this larger pattern of deception. Sarah sank back into her chair, cradling her coffee cup. "The Hendersons have girls, Emma and Emily. They're in Michael and Matthew's class. Lisa Henderson found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after leaving the clinic, just like me. Her husband knows. He was the one who first started investigating Dr. Harrison." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Then there's the Ramirez twins, the Chin twins and the Morrison twins. All born within 4 months of each other. All conceived right after stopping treatment at the clinic. The pattern is, it's impossible to ignore." My legal mind was already cataloging the implications, the potential damages, the years of emotional trauma multiplied across multiple families. But another thought struck me. The twins, all of them, they must look alike. I mean, if they all share. I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah nodded slowly. "They all have certain features in common. We noticed it at the playgroup when they were babies. The same chin, similar eyes. We told ourselves it was coincidence, that all babies look alike at that age. But as they grew?" She reached for her phone, pulling up a photo that made my breath catch. 6 sets of twins at what looked like a birthday party, all around 7 years old, all bearing subtle but unmistakable similarities. "Jesus," I whispered, the full implications hitting me. Harrison wasn't just lying about infertility. He was. The word stuck in my throat. "We think he was using his own genetic material," Sarah finished quietly. "Mixed with the fathers. It's why all the twins share certain features, why they all have such strong resemblances to their fathers but with other characteristics we couldn't explain." The room spun slightly as memories flooded back. All those appointments, all those procedures, all those moments when we trusted him completely. "That's why you kept them from me," I said, the realization dawning. "Not just because of the stress or the timing. You were protecting them from this?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know for sure, not then. But I suspected something wasn't right. The other mothers, we've spent years comparing notes, watching our children grow, seeing the patterns emerge. When the investigation started, when other doctors began reviewing Harrison's records." She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. "The evidence was sitting on her coffee table, spread across medical records and newspaper articles. More importantly, it was visible in the school photos on her walls, my sons, who looked so much like me but also carried traces of something else, someone else." "The meeting next week," I said, my voice hoarse. "All the families will be there?" Sarah nodded. "Most of them. Some of the fathers still don't know everything. The Ramirez twins think their father is dead. Their mother never told him about the pregnancy. The Chin twins' father moved to Seattle before their mother found out. We've all been waiting, watching our children grow, carrying these secrets. Until now," I finished. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. This wasn't just about Sarah and me anymore, wasn't just about Michael and Matthew. This was about a dozen children, half a dozen families, all caught in the web of one man's devastating deception. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the open window, a group of kids walking home for lunch from Plymouth Elementary. Sarah tensed, checking her watch. "The twins will be home soon," she said softly. "Half day today. Teacher conferences." The simple domesticity of the statement hit me like a physical blow. How many half days had I missed? How many teacher conferences? What are we going to tell them? I asked, the question that had been burning in my throat finally escaping. How do we explain any of this? I gestured at the documents spread across the coffee table, the evidence of a deception that had shaped not just our lives, but the lives of 5 other families. Sarah pulled out another folder, this one filled with what looked like child psychology articles. Of course she'd researched this. She'd always been the prepared one. "I've been consulting with Dr. Martinez. She specializes in helping children understand complex family situations. She's been working with some of the other families too." The idea that there was already a support system in place, that other families were navigating these same troubled waters, was both comforting and devastating. "And what does Dr. Martinez suggest?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. "She says we need to focus on what hasn't changed, that they're loved, that they're wanted, that none of this is their fault." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "She says 7 is old enough to understand that adults sometimes make mistakes, even big ones, but not old enough to handle the full complexity of what Harrison did. I picked up one of the twin school photos, studying it with new eyes. How much of what I saw as myself in their features was really there? How much was Harrison? The thought made my stomach turn. And what about the meeting next week? All the children will be there. Won't they notice? Won't they see the similarities? Sarah nodded slowly. That's part of why we're doing this now. They're getting older. They're starting to notice things, ask questions. The Hendersons girls already pointed out how much they look like Michael and Matthew. We can't keep them in the dark forever. The clock ticked steadily in the background, counting down the minutes until our sons, would walk through the door. Have you told your new husband about this? About the meeting? A flash of pain crossed Sarah's face. James knows everything. He's been incredibly understanding. He wants to come to the meeting too, to support me. To support them? She hesitated. What about Rachel? Will you tell her? The question hit me like a sucker punch. Rachel, who wanted children. Rachel, who was planning our future together. Rachel, who had no idea she was dating a father of 7-year-old twins. I don't know, I admitted. How do you even begin that conversation? The sound of bikes on the sidewalk made us both freeze. Through the window, I could see 2 small figures approaching, their backpacks bouncing in rhythm. My sons. Coming home from school. To their home. Where I was a stranger sitting in their living room. We have about 30 seconds, Sarah said quietly, to decide if you're staying or going. They'll have questions either way, but... She left the choice hanging in the air between us. The weight of the moment pressed down on me like a physical force. Stay and potentially shatter their world, or go and lose them again. Face the complexity of explaining who I am, or retreat into the simplicity of continued absence. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The decision was made for me by the sound of a key in the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs as the door swung open, bringing with it the chaos of childhood, backpacks dropping, shoes scuffing, voices overlapping in excitement about something that happened at school. The scent of chalk dust and playground grass drifted in with them, so ordinary and yet so extraordinary in this moment. Mom. Mrs. Anderson said our science project was the best in the whole. The words died in Michael's throat as he saw me. Both boys froze in the doorway, their identical expressions of surprise making my chest tight. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking, not just to me but to the photo of the other twins Sarah had shown me. The evidence of Harrison's deception written in the angles of their faces. Sarah stood, her lawyer's composure cracking slightly. Michael, Matthew, there's someone very important I'd like you to meet. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. Through the window, I could see their bikes fallen carelessly on the lawn, blue paint gleaming in the midday sun. Such a normal sight on such an extraordinary day. You're the man from the coffee shop, Matthew said, his head tilting slightly, my gesture perfectly mimicked. Mom's friend. The word friend hung in the air like smoke, a placeholder for a truth too complex for a 7-year-old to grasp. Actually, Sarah began, her voice gentle but firm, he's more than that. Much more. She moved to stand between us, a bridge connecting 2 worlds that should never have been separate. This is Daniel Mitchell. He's your father. The words seemed to change the very air in the room. Michael's eyes widened, darting between Sarah and me, while Matthew took an unconscious step closer to his brother. I remained frozen, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile moment. But you said our dad lived far away, Michael said, his voice small. You said he couldn't be with us. The accusation in his tone was aimed at Sarah, but the pain behind it struck me like a physical blow. What other explanations had she given them over the years? What stories had they told themselves about why their father wasn't in their lives? I made a mistake, Sarah said softly, her voice thick with tears. A very big mistake. Your father didn't know about you and that's my fault. But he's here now because he wants to know you. Because you deserve to know him. Matthew, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. Is that why we look like him? The directness of the question, the perceptiveness behind it, made my breath catch. Of course they had noticed. Children always notice more than we think they do. I found my voice at last, though it came out rougher than I intended. Yes, I said simply. That's why. It wasn't the whole truth. The complexity of Harrison's actions would have to wait for when they were older, but it was enough for now. Michael took a tentative step forward, his eyes, my father's eyes, studying my face intently. Mom says I laugh like you, he said, somewhere between a question and a statement. And that Matthew does the thing with his hands when he's thinking like you do. I looked down at my own hands, realizing I had been unconsciously tapping my fingers in the pattern that had always helped me concentrate. Matthew was doing the same thing, though he probably didn't even realize it. Nature versus nurture played out in perfect synchronicity. Would you? I cleared my throat, trying again. Would you like to tell me about your science project? It was a small offering, a tiny bridge across the 7-year chasm between us, but it was all I could manage in that moment. Michael's face lit up at the mention of the science project, momentarily overriding his uncertainty. We built a solar system. Matthew did all the measurements and I painted the planets. He paused, then added with the brutal honesty of childhood, "Mom's not very good at science stuff. Are you?" The question pierced straight through my heart. How many other things didn't they know about me? How many inherited talents had gone unexplained? "I actually minored in astronomy in college," I said softly. "I always loved the stars." "Really?" Matthew perked up. "We have a telescope. Mom got it for our birthday, but we can't figure out how to use it right." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "It's in our room. Do you want to see it?" The invitation to enter their personal space felt monumental. Sarah touched my arm lightly, the first physical contact between us since yesterday. "Go," she whispered. "I'll make lunch." The normalcy of the statement belied the extraordinary nature of the moment. Following my sons up the stairs, I noticed more details I'd missed before. The height measurements marked on the wall, dating back to their earliest years. Framed certificates from swimming lessons and t-ball. A family calendar covered in Sarah's neat handwriting, dentist appointments, play dates, school events. The daily scaffolding of a life I should have helped build. Their bedroom was exactly what you'd expect of 7-year-old boys, and yet so much more personal than I could have imagined. 2 identical beds with different superhero sheets. A bookshelf crammed with everything from picture books to beginning chapter books. And there, in the corner, a surprisingly professional-looking telescope. "It's a Celestron Nexstar," I said, recognizing the model. "This is a serious piece of equipment." Both boys beamed with pride, and I wondered if Sarah had researched telescopes as thoroughly as she researched everything else, wanting to give them the best even in my absence. "Can you show us how to use it?" Michael asked, bouncing slightly on his toes, another gesture I recognized from my own childhood. "Mom says we have to wait for a clear night, but it was clear last night and we still couldn't see anything good." "The trick is knowing where to look," I said, falling naturally into teaching mode. "And understanding how the Earth's rotation affects what we can see." I began explaining basic astronomy, watching their faces light up with understanding. They were quick learners, interrupting each other to ask questions that showed remarkable insight for their age. Sarah appeared in the doorway with sandwiches, her eyes glistening as she watched us. The scene must have looked so ordinary from the outside, a father teaching his sons about the stars. But the weight of lost time pressed against my chest with each breath. 7 years of missed bedtime stories, of unexplained talents, of questions they couldn't ask because I wasn't there to answer them. "There's a meteor shower next week," I found myself saying. If it's okay with your mom, maybe I could come over and help you set up the telescope properly." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. The boys looked at Sarah expectantly. She was still holding the plate of sandwiches, her knuckles white against the ceramic. "Actually," she said carefully, "maybe we could all go to Forest Park. There's less light pollution there." She paused, then added, "The Henderson twins were planning to watch it too. Their dad knows a good spot." The mention of the other twins brought reality crashing back. Next week wasn't just about meteor showers, it was about the meeting, about all the families coming together, about truths too complex for children to understand. But looking at my sons' eager faces, I realized that maybe that was okay for now. Maybe we could build this new relationship one star at a time, one truth at a time, until they were ready for the full constellation of their story. As the afternoon light began to fade, I found myself sitting on the floor of my son's bedroom, surrounded by the debris of childhood, half-eaten sandwiches, astronomy books spread open, and 2 increasingly sleepy boys who seemed reluctant to let me leave. The telescope stood ready by the window, a bridge between past and future, waiting for clear skies and new discoveries. Sarah appeared in the doorway again, her face soft with an emotion I couldn't quite read. "Boys, it's time to start your homework." The gentle reminder was met with twin groans that made my heart ache with its familiarity. I used to make the same sound when my mother called me in from playing. As the boys gathered their backpacks, Michael turned to me suddenly. "Will you come to our baseball game on Saturday? We're playing the Rockets." The invitation was casual, but the hope in his voice was unmistakable. Matthew added quickly, "I'm pitcher and Michael's really good at batting." I looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I wouldn't miss it, I said, my voice rough with emotion. 7 years of missed games were behind us, but there were still so many ahead. The thought was both painful and promising. Later, standing on Sarah's porch in the gathering dusk, we tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The clinic documents were safely stored away, waiting for next week's meeting. The truth about Dr. Harrison and the other families would have to be handled carefully, professionally. But for now, for these precious first moments of fatherhood, we had chosen a simpler truth. They're amazing, I said softly, looking back at the house where 2 small figures were visible in their bedroom window, waving goodbye. You did an incredible job with them, Sarah. Despite everything, because of everything, they've always been part of you, she replied, her voice catching. Even when you didn't know it. Every time they laugh, every time they get excited about science or tap their fingers when they're thinking. You've been here all along, in ways I couldn't erase even if I'd wanted to. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. The complexity of my new reality hit me again. There would be more difficult conversations ahead, more truths to face, more challenges to navigate. But looking back at the bedroom window where my sons were still waving, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest lies don't destroy us, they reshape us. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't end in darkness, but lead us to unexpected light. And sometimes in the midst of unraveling a web of deception, we discover that truth isn't a single revelation, but a journey we take one step at a time, one star at a time, one moment at a time. The future held so many uncertainties. The meeting with the other families, the legal implications of Harrison's actions, the delicate balance of blending my old life with this new reality. But for the first time in 8 years I felt truly complete. Because sometimes the most beautiful constellations are formed not from the stars we plan to see, but from the ones that surprise us with their sudden, brilliant light. If stories like this touch your heart and make you reflect on the power of truth, forgiveness, and second chances, please consider supporting our channel through Super Thanks. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life. Remember, in life's darkest moments, just like in astronomy, sometimes we need to adjust our focus to see the light that was there all along. The truth may hurt, but lies hurt longer. And love, like starlight, finds its way through even the darkest of nights.